10 of the kids sit on the diving board, 2 in the water below the board. 2 young coaches stand besides the kids. Years before Speedos, of course, they're wearing a hodgepodge of bathing suits. As you look at the photo, the kid 3 in from the right is me. The kid to the left is my best pal, Jeff. I've thrown my left arm over his shoulder. I, like Ike, was the president then. One of the girls is big for her age. One of the girls will soon be pregnant and forced to drop out of school. Another will die of a heroin overdose. One will marry 4 different times, have 4 children by 4 different men. One has a sister whose husband will beat her to death. One of the boys will join the Marines and survive a tour in Vietnam. Another will join the Army and die in the Central Highlands. One will kill himself with a shotgun after he's exposed as a queer. One will become an anti-immigrant racist. None of us knows any of this. We are all smiling. Team photograph, 1957, Percy, Pennsylvania. A poem in our guest most recent book of poem, Smart Fish Don't Bite. Good evening. My name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaboration between the Moonstone Arts Center of Philadelphia and PhillyCAM. The purpose of our program is to give our audience the experience of the very rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding community. So tonight we have a favorite poet, definitely of the Moonstone Art. In fact, his most recent book was published by Moonstone Arts Press, and that is Bill Ehrhart. Bill, who's the author of this book called Smart Fish Don't Bite, is a Marine Corps veteran of both the Vietnam War and Vietnam Veterans Against the War. Bill's the author of multiple books of both prose and poetry, including Vietnam Percy, a combat Marine memoir, and Thank You for Your Service, collected poems. Bill holds a PhD from the University of Wales at Swansea and spent several decades as a master's teacher of English and history at the Haverford School for Boys, retiring in 2019. As the poems in this most recent collection demonstrate, he is a writer who fought in Vietnam, not a Vietnam writer. So good evening, Bill, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry.
Well, thank you very much for having me here.
Right. So I wanted to start off with that, what I call that hyphenated status that the world gave you at one time as the Vietnam War poet, which you were, but I think you've tried to change that. And can you speak to that? How that, why you wanted to make that transformation?
Well, the first, with a couple of exceptions of, I had my first poem I ever published was in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and it was a long, rambling piece about being a student at Swarthmore. But the first really serious published work I had was 8 poems that appeared in an anthology called Winning Hearts and Minds that was published by Vietnam Veterans Against the War in 1972. It's actually a remarkable, I'm really happy to be part of that because it's the first time that a book of poetry was published by anti-war veterans protesting the war they'd fought in while that war was still going on. That had never happened before. But of course, that was my entree into the world of poetry. And for most of my life, I got tagged as a Vietnam War poet. We like to I guess it's a human quality, certainly an American quality. We like to categorize people. You give them a label, you set them aside, and that's that. This is a gay poet. This is a feminist poet. This is, well, the Vietnam War was 13 months of my life, and I'm now 77 years old. It had a big impact, but even my collected poems, which is 308 poems, there's fewer than 20% of them deal with the Vietnam War. That leaves 80% of 300 poems that deal with all sorts of stuff. This new book that Larry Robin published has I think there's 7 out of 78 poems that even make a reference to the Vietnam War. But meanwhile, whenever I get identified not whenever, but I'm often identified as the Dean of Vietnam War Poetry. I don't even know what that means. The dean, where I taught high school for many years, the dean was the guy who gave detention and dealt with discipline problems. What does a dean of poetry do? Am I supposed to give people detention? I don't know. But as I said earlier, what I realized in my 40s, as much as it irritated me to be pigeonholed like that, I noticed that I was getting invited to fairly important conferences, things like TET plus 10 and Vietnam and America from War to Peace to Reconciliation, and Reflections on My Life, which was down in Tulane. And I'm not getting invited to the Breadloaf Writers Conference. Or to the Geraldine R. Dodge Festival, or if I weren't recognized as a Vietnam War poet, I wouldn't be recognized at all.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of grudgingly accept the fact that, okay, that's my niche. But every now and then, this is fairly interesting because I just got censored from the Poetry Out Loud. Are you familiar with that program?
Yes.
They've just revised the list of acceptable poems, and my 2 poems were thrown out. Along with Maya Angelou and Natasha Trethewey. So I'm in good company. And actually, if the current administration sort of did not find me objectionable, I'd think I'm doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But there were 2 poems that they used for years, for 2 decades. One of them dealt with the Vietnam War, but the other one was a poem called The Farmer of Dreams, and had nothing to do with the Vietnam War. And I was so thrilled that they actually recognized this guy can write about something other than the war.
Well, The Farmer of Dreams, I mean, and I'm going to jump into that. Did you write something on a farmer in Vietnam? Was that?
Yeah, there's a poem called Farmer Nguyen.
Yeah, no, yeah. So you did.
But that was
yeah.
That's that guy in Vietnam. The Farmer of Dreams really has to do with the difference between what one hopes to accomplish in one's life and what one can really do.
Right.
But it's not about the war. It's not about any war. It's about the failure of being able to create the kind of world that I'd like to live in.
You were also featured on the public television special documentary that was done on Vietnam, and I think twice in that. I'm not sure. I remember seeing you.
Are you talking about the Burns and Novick
Yes,
thing?
exactly.
Actually, I was in a documentary, the first documentary done on the Vietnam War back in 1983, called Vietnam and Television History. And I was very happy with the way that I was presented in that. A couple of other times after that, it took me 2 more experiences with documentary filmmakers to realize that the man who had done the 1983 production was a real exception. And I got so angry at the way that I was handled by subsequent documentary filmmakers who used me as a talking head. They basically used a sentence here, a sentence there. I mean, we're talking from 2-hour interviews. but they would pick out a sentence. They would cherry pick to have me say what they wanted said, not what I had to say. And so I actually didn't do another interview for 20 years. But when I got contacted by Lynn Novick, and it's Burns and Novick. Ken Burns is the marquee name, but the real work most of the work was done by Lynn Novick. I met Ken Burns. I worked with her for 6 years. I met Ken one time a couple months before the thing aired. But when Lynn contacted me, she actually knew who I was, had read some of my work, could talk about it intelligently. I actually had somebody from the military channel call me up and ask to interview me. They were doing a series of documentaries about major U.S. battles post-World War II. And they were from Vietnam. They were doing the battle for this Hue City and the siege of Khe Sanh. This woman didn't even know which of those two battles I'd been in. Mm-hmm. And I said, why don't you go do some homework and call me back after you know something about me? Well, of course, I never heard from her again. But that's the kind of crap that you have to put up with. Lynn had done more than that. And I also recognize that, like it or not, this is Ken Burns. This is going to become the permanent documentary record of the Vietnam War. And I figured, well, I don't know how bad it's going to be, but I'd like to get my 2 cents worth in. I also cut a deal with them, which, somewhat to my surprise, they went along with. I said I wouldn't be interviewed unless they donated money to the people we screwed. Oh, we're public television. We're not for profit. I said, you got to be kidding me. Mm-hmm. You're going to be rolling in dough from this thing. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do this unless you give something to the people we screwed. They actually agreed to it. And they agreed in writing and put it in my contract. And it turns out that they did make a substantial donation to an organization called Peace Trees Vietnam, which I did some background checking on, and it's really a legitimate bunch. So I figured no matter how bad this documentary is, at least somebody in Vietnam is going to get something good out of it. And it had its problems. It was not, there were a lot of things wrong with it. But it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. And the fact of the matter is, Bank of America and David Koch were not going to pay for a scathing expose of American imperialism. That just wasn't going to happen. So it was all right. I'm not sorry I did it. It gave me entree to some audiences that I never would have been invited to be in front of and speak to if I hadn't been part of it. But it was, it was okay. And the fact is, if you made a documentary about the Vietnam War that satisfied me, that was historically accurate, I'd be showing it in my basement to my 3 best friends.
Right.
So,
kind of switching up a little bit, staying with Vietnam and Vietnam vets. I read a very long, I think it was 51 pages that I found on the internet about your writing, and both prose and poetry. But it was all cast in this sense, this is kind of paraphrasing, is the parsing of all your poems and parses of your poems in almost like psychoanalysis, always looking at it as this is a healing exercise rather than also an information exercise. So, I mean, how do you feel about that? I mean, there has been, of course, a lot of work done on post-traumatic stress, and I'm not saying that I didn't understand it, but I after reading 2 of your books, I didn't see the same thing.
Well, how do I feel about that? You know this. You're a writer yourself. You write the stuff, you put it in the public domain, and what other people do with it is out of my hands. And a lot of this stuff is written by I'd be willing to bet that that piece was written by some academic who is trying to, pad out his resume by getting this published in some academic journal or something, and he might be a psychologist or whatever. Whatever they, I can't help what they do to this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar. I'm trying to think what piece that is. I don't know.
Well,
I don't remember.
I actually have a copy in my
Yeah.
in my bag, and I'll give it to you if you haven't seen it. It's 51 pages long. I read the whole thing, and I said, I have to discuss it with you because I said, geez, we must have read, not necessarily read two different
Yeah.
collections of Bill's poems, but I don't see that, that was his target.
As I said, you write this, you write stuff, you put it in the public domain, and then you, what other people do with it is, I can't do anything about that.
And, staying with that, and of course they parsed things from your book, Beautiful Wreckage, which I find a stunning title for any book. You mean both those things, and I said, geez, this Beautiful Wreckage, but when one goes through that collection, you see both of those phenomena. You see some gorgeous, gorgeous poems that have nothing to do necessarily with Vietnam or your Vietnam experience, and then you have ones that are really, really searing, and really open people's eyes. Here's somebody was there, and somebody's not sugarcoating it. I mean, sugarcoating it wasn't talking about somebody else. You were talking about yourself, and kind of owning. You were owning the war that you were in.
Well, I think actually people have often asked me, how can you be so honest? How can you be so public with your private life? I think, most people have a kind of built-in filter that they protect themselves from too much public exposure. I must have been bending over tying my shoes when God was handing out that particular gene because it seemed to miss me completely. I just, it comes to my mind and I say it. Sometimes my wife gets very embarrassed. But I realized back when I first started writing about the war, which I didn't do in Vietnam, I didn't know how to write then, but when I got to college in 1969, and I was struggling with the war and also trying to learn how to be a writer because I had a high school education. Now, all through that intense period of my time in college, I'm also writing poems about geese in the autumn and broken-hearted love poems, but I'm wrestling with the war. And I remember trying to write a poem about, what do you college kids know? And I went to Swarthmore College, very political, very lefty. Mm-hmm. And I'm going, well, yeah, what do you college kids know about it? Yeah, the war might have been screwed up, but you wouldn't have the right to even protest it if it weren't for guys like me. And as I'm trying to write this poem, I realized this is bull crap. That's not what I was fighting for in Vietnam. And I remember taking the drafts of this poem and balling them up and throwing them away. Oh. And realizing, what do I really have to say? What do I think? What do I feel? And I also discovered became to understand that if I want to say what I have to say, I can't be a private person. I've simply got to lay it out there. And that's what I started doing. And in terms of owning the war, yeah, I mean, I did terrible stuff. I did stuff that I have been ashamed of all my life. I will go to my grave ashamed. People thank me for my service, and I want to freaking punch them in the face. You're going to thank me for what I did? Are you out of your mind? You have no idea what I did. And I did it at the behest of my government, which sent me halfway around the world to kill, maim, and make miserable people who'd never done me any harm or my country. But I did that. I volunteered for Vietnam. When they didn't send me to Vietnam right away, I complained to the Marine Corps until they did send me. Oh. I can't get around the fact that that whatever else is going on here, I am to blame for my own decisions. I am to blame for my own behavior. I had a chaplain in November of 1967. I'd been in Vietnam for like 9 months by then. I was expressing my real, why am I here? What are we doing here? What are you doing here, Father? He was a Catholic priest. And he actually offered to, he said, there's such a thing as a conscientious objector's discharge. You could be a conscientious objector and apply to get out of the Marine Corps. Well, I'm 19 years old. My response at that point was, CO was the first two letters of coward. You ain't hanging that albatross around my neck.
Right.
I got 3 months to go. I'll take my chances.
Uh-huh.
And I did, and I survived. But I got to tell you, I've spent most of my adult life wishing I had had the courage to take Father Lyons up on his offer.
Uh-huh.
Because I knew by then what I was doing was not just nuts, it was wrong.
Uh-huh.
And yet he offered me a potential way out, and I wouldn't take it. I did not have the courage to face the kind of crap that I would have gotten from the Marine Corps if I would have tried to be a CO.
Other veterans, how do they come back to you? You're a well-known poet, and meeting up with you again, and how do they respond?
Well, the ones that are my pals, we get along great.
Right.
I just spent a lovely 4 days up in the Poconos a few weeks ago with a number of old friends of mine from Vietnam Veterans Against the War. We do fine. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace. The veterans who think that we should have nuked Hanoi and fried Jane Fonda in cooking oil think I'm a commie bastard.
Right.
Whatever. They can think what they like. But the veterans I've known all my life, we get along fine. Actually, I didn't even realize until I went to graduate school in Chicago in 1977, there was a sign about a veterans meeting. And so I went, a veterans meeting. I went to this meeting. And this is 1977. They're all outraged that Jimmy Carter's going to pardon the draft dodgers and they want to. And I'm looking around at these guys going, what the freaking war were you in, you guys? I didn't know that there were people who could go through that experience and come away not thinking this was crazy and we shouldn't have done it. I didn't, that was a real shock to me. But they're out there. I don't know how many. I don't know what. There were 3 million, I think it's around 3 million American military served in Vietnam over the course of the war. I have no idea how many of them think we weren't allowed to win or whatever. But the ones that I've spent my life with are all anti-war vets.
Huh. Did you ever, and this is a kind of, I asked this to someone else who was a veteran of Vietnam. Have you ever had someone who, number one, didn't serve, period, and expressed to you somewhat of a remorse that they weren't called up and they didn't serve, like somebody else? Actually, when Veterans Day comes around, I think of a guy who was a Marine who went to the same high school. He was a couple of classes behind me. And he was killed in Vietnam. His name was Larry Bolger. And he was a track star. And I always felt, I say, Larry went and did that, Charles, but you didn't. I had really deferment from service because of my parent. But there was a certain tinge of me is saying, you were lucky. You were very lucky. And there were 57,000 or 58,000 guys that weren't that lucky. But did you ever have that experience of somebody saying, Bill, I feel this way?
I have. A few times I have encountered that. There was a man my wife used to work with who actually became a teacher. Being a high school teacher in the mid 60s was deferrable.
Right.
And he became a teacher so he wouldn't get drafted. And then, as soon as the war was over, he changed careers and became a computer guy. And this must have been about 1985 or 86. This guy actually said, "Gee, I really wish I'd gone to Vietnam. I missed, I missed my chance to have an adventure," and it was all I could do to keep from strangling
Right.
this guy. You've got to be freaking.
Yeah.
On other occasions, I have said to people, I'll be happy to trade my nightmares for yours any day.
Absolutely.
I certainly do not resent anybody who avoided service in Vietnam. What? I want somebody to go through that experience I had?
Exactly.
Jeez, no.
Exactly.
I don't mind that at all. And if you had to, dress up in a ballerina costume to get deferred or whatever, I don't care. That's fine. What I get angry at is people like George W. Bush, who say, "I joined the Texas Air National Guard to serve my country," or Dan Quayle, who, "I joined the Army Reserve to serve my," people who claim that they wanted to serve their country, so they did all this stuff to avoid actually putting their lives at risk. That I get upset at.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to, switch to one of the really main reasons why we're here is smart fish don't
Yeah,
bite,
here
because
we're ending up talking about the war the
yeah,
whole freaking
again,
time again.
but and how that is so representative. And I'm having read Beautiful Wreckage, I said that, well, this isn't necessarily a real departure, because if you really read those poems, there's a lot of gorgeous, gorgeous poems in that book. Was it 1986 that was published?
Oh, Beautiful Wreckage was 1999.
Okay.
What he's referring to is a selected poems. It's 120 poems that Gary Metris at Adosser Press did.
Yeah.
And again, it's Beautiful Wreckage because that's a great title. I'm glad you like it. But again, out of those 121 poems, the overwhelming majority of them have nothing to do with the Vietnam War.
Yeah. And so, talk about this book, and kind of in a capsule, because there's so much in it. There's so much. The poem I read about that photograph from 1950. There's so much in there about your relationship. With father. That one poem you taught teaching my father how to hug.
The hug, yeah.
And then about the gift that your mother gave you. It's the book is just so tender, and we'll talk about it. Talk about what you wanted, what this book really represents to you.
Thing is, I write about my life. I have a very pedestrian brain. I'm not very creative. If it didn't actually happen, I don't really know how to make stuff up. I write about my life. The war is one part of my life. So are lots and lots of other things. The stuff my mother gave me. I don't know where these poems come from. There was a point at which, when I was younger, I would try to arrange poems thematically, and I gave up on that. The collected poems that was published in 2019, and these poems are printed in the order I wrote them.
Yeah, I saw that
That's
in the
way
introduction.
So one day I'm thinking about the freaking war in Ukraine, and the next day I'm thinking about Brussels sprouts.
Yeah.
And this is for better or worse my brain at work.
Yeah.
And there's a few references to the war in here. Very few. I don't think there's 2 or 3 poems that even deal entirely with the war, and the other thing is that as I've gotten older, I've been able to laugh at myself a lot more than I used to, and I've been able to have fun with language. There's some stuff in here that's totally loony.
Yeah.
There's 2 or 3 things that actually grew out of a lunch engagement. I have lunch once a month with my college roommate, whom I've known for over 50 years, and his oldest childhood friend, whom I've now known for 52 years. And we do these monthly poetry challenges where one of us will make up silly rules and say, here's the challenge for this month, and we try to address it. And there's actually at least 3 poems in here that came out of that exercise, and I realized, oh, this is kind of fun. I think I'll keep it.
Yeah. Well, it's great to talk about it, but I mean, our audience surely wants to, come on the inside and hear you read your poems. So I'm going to turn things over to you and let you read your poems.
Okay, thank you. I have a bit of a lineup here, I think, and again, I've tried to mix this up. This first piece I'll read is called "I Heard a Fly Buzz." Those of you who are Emily Dickinson fans will recognize that as the opening line of one of her poems. Emily Dickinson's going to kill me. It's not her fault, but dead is dead, no matter if you make it rhyme or not. All the more ironic when you realize she's on my list of all-time faves. I've taught her poems in school for years, got 15-year-old boys to love her, or at least appreciate her skill and ingenuity, her steadfast will to be herself despite of convention. Inspiration for anyone, especially youngsters struggling to discover who they are and who they want to be. And this is how she pays me back? Okay, it's not her fault. Just the same, my love for her may cost me in the end. 2 years ago, I learned I had the big C. Doctors recommended surgery. I said, okay, but first I want to go to Amherst, Massachusetts for a week-long seminar I've been accepted to. In Dickinson's very home, to stand where she had stood, to see what she had gazed on from her bedroom window. Who would pass that up? Not me. I asked the doctors to delay the surgery 6 weeks so I could go. And everything seemed fine for 15 months. But now I've got a 7-millimeter lesion where my prostate used to be. Radiation's next, and maybe that will do the trick. Or maybe not. But something's going to kill me in the end, no matter what. After all, that's life. And there are sadder ways to die and sadder things to die for than the stillness in the room. Now, that was, I've been cancer-free for coming up on 6 years, so obviously it didn't kill me. The radiation did work, but that's my my Dickinson poem. And let's do another one here, a COVID poem. Foxes in a time of coronavirus. Never saw the like of it before. 4 sets of railroad tracks on one side, 4 lanes of traffic on another, parking lots on either side, barely space for bushes and a patch of grass. An early April day, sun shining. And there, beside the fir tree, a fox. There, another, smaller, and another, 3, 4, 5, 6. Incredible. A vixen and her 6 small kits, the mother keeping watch, aware of us, 15 feet away, my wife and I, but not alarmed so long as we stood still. Her babies tussling, tumbling, racing, pouncing, prancing, chasing one another, having fun, though never far from Mom. I know it's anthropomorphically incorrect to think of animals in human terms, but if those baby foxes weren't as happy as a schoolboy on a snow day off from school, I'll eat this mask I'm wearing. And then here's one that's not so cheery. This has a history. I'm not even going to try to read it. There's an epigraph by the French poet François Villon, I'm terrible. I won't even try to pronounce the French, but it essentially talks about Christmas, the dead time, when even the wolves must live off the wind. That's the English translation. It's called Wolves in Winter. We aren't used to thinking of Christmas as the dead time, but it is deep winter when even the wolves must live off the wind, and the coming of spring still months away. The shortest day, candles on trees, boughs of holly decking the halls, pagan rituals time out of mind, rooted in fear, millennial deep. Will we have enough food? Will the fire stay lit? Who will be left when the green time comes? Again. This has little to do with religion, except that religion begins in fear. In a cave on a cliff, perhaps in Lascaux, or Neanderthal huddled around a fire, a high-rise in Brooklyn, a condo in Kent, I think, therefore I am. All that I love, all that I know, does it really just end? With or without us, spring always comes. But even the wolves must live off the wind in the lean times. Even the wolves. The wolves. Now here's one that touches on that's about the war. God, Guns, and Ginny. I actually mentioned that phrase to somebody, and she wrote back and said, gee, that sounds like the title of a poem. I thought, okay, let's see what I can do with this. Well, of course it was righteous. Bear any burden, pay any price, what you could do for your country. Godless communists, after all. You may have been only 17, but you'd seen them already in Hungary, Cuba, Berlin. Something had to be done, and someone would have to do it. There is something about a thatched roof hut in the middle of rice fields, burning, a mortally wounded woman softly keening, child dead in her arms, that can't be blamed on Chairman Mao, Castro, Lenin, or Das Kapital. Heavy artillery flattened that home. Ours. Our guns did that. Long before I reached my 13 months, I discovered I had nothing to cling to but a girl back home, a young girl, still in high school, watching her friends go out on dates, having fun, enjoying all of the things that seniors do for the last exuberant time together. She must have agonized for months before she sent me that final letter. I hope she's had a nice life. I mean it. And let's see here, how we doing? Fishing for winter flounder. I make a reference to D.C. in here. That is not District of Columbia. It is my college roommate, Don Cassidy. Fishing for winter flounder. Well, okay, D.C. said we'd be fishing for winter flounder, but it was already March, and Philadelphia that day dawned sunny and 60 or 65. So I was wearing sandals and shorts, had the top down on my MG Midget when I drove over to Cherry Hill to meet up with Jack in D.C. The three of us took D.C.'s car to the inlet behind Ocean City. By the time we got there, the sky had clouded over, the temperature had dropped to 40 or 42, and it was drizzling, a kind of soupy mist that burrowed deep into the bones and stayed there. And my sandaled feet sank nearly to my knees in the tidal salt marsh. And my two jackass friends were actually having fun, wouldn't leave, made me stay hour after agonizing hour, freezing, shivering, miserable, maybe the longest day of my life. And I didn't catch one lousy fish. Not a zip, zilch, bloody hell. This was in 1975. I've never gone fishing again. And that's true. Let's see here. We got about, what, 10 minutes or so? Less than that, less than that.
Yeah.
Let's
You have
make a few.
you have a good 15 to 60
Oh, here,
minutes.
you'll like this one. This is no regrets. No regrets. I'm always amazed when people say they have no regrets. Robert Redford, for instance, Ingrid Bergman, Elena Kagan, Drew Barrymore, Susan Gale, Jennifer Aniston, William Schreier, Henry Kissinger, for Christ's sake. Are they serious? Lying? Delusional? I've got more regrets than I can count. Taunting David Pritz to the point of tears, calling Barbara Hoffman Barn for years, putting my father out of the car on US 309, how he got home I never asked, blowing up frogs with firecrackers, killing a pregnant snake. That and a whole lot more, and that was before I even got out of high school. Then I joined the Marines. You want to talk regrets? How much time do you have? Blood on my hands for killing people who didn't deserve to die, helping to turn a country into a graveyard, receiving medals for doing the bidding of leaders who should have been doing time. Heard enough? I'm only warming up. Making my mother cry for giving me a tie at Christmas with a Liberty Bell motif. None too keen on the USA after that war. Kicking my wife out of the car in Carolina, throwing up drunk in front of my daughter. How do you live a life with no regrets? St. Francis, maybe. Mother Teresa. Gandhi. Henry Kissinger? You gotta be kidding me. Here's another funny. This is very short. How poems are created. It's written for a friend of mine named Indran Amirthanayagam, a wonderful poet, and he's the poet in this poem. A fellow poet was planning a dinner before my reading, and he asked me if I had any food restrictions. I'm not too keen on Brussels sprouts or eggplant, I replied. He said, now that is a poem, my friend. It wasn't, but it is now. Let's see here. How are we doing?
You're fine. Just keep on.
13. Okay, let's see here. I had given Deb some pictures, which I guess weren't translatable or something like that. I'll do the worst years of my life. This has a reference to Vietnam in it, but it's not about Vietnam. Oh, listen, I mentioned getting throwing up drunk in front of my daughter when she was little. This is on the road to Damascus. I had my first blackout drunk when I was 16. Drank half a gallon of Ernest and Julio Gallo's port wine on Snake Hill Road in Buckingham Township, PA. Woke up the next morning on the lawn in front of my house in Percy. Since then, I've graduated with honors from high school, earned a good conduct medal, sergeant stripes, honorable discharge from the U.S. Marines, bachelor's, master's, doctoral degrees. I'm a much-published poet and author, high school teacher, husband, and father. I've never missed a day of work because of alcohol, never went to work under the influence, never had a DUI or got arrested for alcohol abuse or abusing someone else while drunk. All in all, I thought I managed alcohol about as well as anybody should. So here I am in the Radnor Township Police Department drunk tank, in a white paper jumpsuit, shoelaces removed to be sure I don't hang myself. 66 years old, found passed out behind the wheel at the intersection of Lancaster Avenue and Ithan Road. Handcuffs, mugshots, fingerprints, a one-piece stainless steel toilet, not even a cell with bars, just a door with a see-through full-glass window. Maybe I should reconsider my approach to alcohol. which I did. I haven't had a drink in over 10 years, uh, but it's amazing that it took me that long to realize that I might have a problem. I think I will skip that one. Ah, the worst years of my life. Junior high school. Oh, yeah, without a doubt. In gym class, I couldn't do a single chin up, and other boys were sprouting pubic hair, which I was not, and they were quick to notice in the shower after class and comment on in language not designed to boost self confidence. One day I made a jackass of myself by blurting out, "Let's have a makeout party," as a class activity. Mr. Hollenbach, RFH, our less than jovial homeroom teacher, let me know he didn't think my joke was funny, and he kept me after school. We had a dance on Valentine's Day, last period in the gym, and I was dancing slow with Darlene Strasser when I realized that what I felt against my chest were breasts. Tits! I'd no idea what to do. Step away or just pretend I hadn't noticed? Nothing's changed when all the world was turning inside out. Oh no, you couldn't get me back in junior high for all the tea in China, not for love or money. I'd sooner find myself again in Vietnam with only an entrenching tool for self-defense than find myself once more in junior high school. And here is the title poem. Now, wait a minute. Why does that clock keep saying 19? Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. That's why. Duh. The 19 is the hour, not the minutes. Okay. Smart fish don't bite. Only the stupid ones who get caught. Gutted, beheaded, filleted and eaten, fried or poached or boiled or broiled, pickled in brine, fed to porpoises raw at SeaWorld, canned for family pets. The smart ones just keep swimming. You'll never meet an intelligent fish because they never take the bait, though they never seem to go hungry. My friend Gary Metris loves to fish, ties his own flies, pulls on his waders and heads for his local river several times a week, rain or shine, year round. Strictly catch and release. Lucky fish, but not very bright. He tells me he often catches the same fish multiple times. One of these days, the guy with the rod won't be so kind. This is why we hear about the liars, hypocrites, and crooks like Spiro Agnew, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Swaggart, Bernie Madoff, Sam Bankman-Fried, and all those other stupid fish who can't resist the bait. Ever wonder what the smart fish are up to? The ones you never hear about? Actually, I guess the guy that's currently occupying the White House is so far defying that one, but we'll see. Let's see. Stealing Baby Jesus. This is actually taken from was inspired by a where is it? Inspired by an article I read in the Philadelphia Inquirer early this winter, back in January. Stealing Baby Jesus. The headline in today's Inquirer News shocked me to my very soul. Baby Jesus stolen from the shrine of St. John Newman. Northern Liberty's neighborhood, 5th Street in Girard, in broad daylight, too. Okay, it was only a plastic figurine, not expensive, though very much beloved, according to the shrine's director. There among the sainted bishop's Bibles, vestments, and eyeglasses. Criminy, is nothing sacred anymore? Only last week a gold crown was stolen from a statue of the Virgin Mary in a Center City Roman Catholic church. It's getting so you don't know who to trust. But a gold crown at least makes fiscal sense. Gold is gold, after all. It's got real value. Pawn it, maybe sell it on the street, buy yourself a quart of Thunderbird wine, a spoonful of smack, a hit of crack. But a plaster baby Jesus? I mean, let's get real. What can you even do with a plaster baby Jesus? Bounce it on your knee? Play peekaboo, I see you? A sacrilege, a sin, and all for what?
Can you? I mean, we're going back.
Yeah.
Can you read that poem I mentioned? Teaching my father to hug.
Oh yeah, sure. Uh,
Could you say a little about your dad?
oh, we had I could say a whole lot about my dad.
Okay.
We had an amazing, a difficult relationship. My father was a minister, and he was probably the most troubled man I've ever known. Chronically depressed, had one public persona, and what we lived with in the house was very different. So we certainly, as I said in that one poem, one time we're driving up to some banquet at the Allentown YMCA. I used to swim there, and I threw him out of the damn car in Quakertown. I just threw him out. I was 16 at the time. We had some rough times, but I did in my late 20s come to terms with the fact that he had done the best he could. His childhood was pretty screwy. And I only get one father, so I made peace with him, which I'm pleased about. But here's teaching my father to hug. I had to teach my father how to hug. For years, he'd grip me by both arms, one hand on either bicep, firmly holding me away from him, our bodies never touching. I've no idea why. Men don't hug? Afraid he once held tight, he'd not let go again? Beats me, but in my 30s I got married and he'd hug my wife the same way. I finally decided this would just not do. Every time he tried to grab my arms, I'd step inside his grip and pull him close to me, a bear hug he could not escape. I did this time and time again until he finally got the hint, gave up, and hugged me back as if he meant it. We had our problems, Dad and me, a lifetime of arguments and ugly moments and miscommunications. But he learned to hug before he died, and I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's your dad. Could you also read that poem about your mom? I think that's...
Yeah, let's
that's a
give it a
beautiful
try. We'll
poem.
see if I can get through it. My mother, my long-suffering mother. Things my mother gave me. Again, I don't know where these poems come from. They just kind of pop out of nowhere. And they go away. I actually, the last poem I read tonight, I don't think I have time to read this and another one.
Okay. You have...
Oh, the hell with it.
Yeah.
Things my mother gave me. When I went off to college in 1969, my mother gave me a Webster's New World Collegiate Dictionary and the money to buy a typewriter. I chose an Olivetti, lightweight and portable. Believe it or not, along with shooting a rifle and close order drill, the Marines taught me to type with all 10 fingers. When I went to graduate school in Chicago 8 years later, my mother bought me a briefcase and a winter coat for the Windy City. The coat kept me from freezing to death through 2 of the coldest and snowiest winters I've ever encountered, and I wore it for years till it finally became so threadbare my wife insisted I buy a new one. The typewriter lasted a dozen years, through college and grad school, years of correspondence, dozens of poems typed and sent out and rejected, and typed again and sent out again, and every now and then a cigar. I even typed my first memoir on it, draft after draft after draft for 2 long years, hundreds of pages, a lot of whiteout. The briefcase lasted even longer. I still have it, and it still works. Though at 76 and mostly retired, I've got little need for it now. And I certainly haven't used that ancient dictionary, now so out of date that usages have changed and words that didn't exist 55 years ago are part of everyday vocabulary. Who needs a dictionary when you've got the internet and spell check? but I keep mine anyway. I haven't opened it in years, but I'll never let it go. My mother gave it to me.
We still have time for one
All
more.
right,
One more.
let's do this last one.
Okay.
It's called Strange Little Reveries. And it's prompted by a question a friend of mine asked me. Do you still dream about your time in Vietnam? And I wrote this in June. I had nightmares for a dozen years, mostly the same recurring dream. Me at a party with friends from every stage of my life, people who had no business being together or knowing each other, but were all having fun until a squad of Marines shows up and starts shooting and bayoneting everyone, a total blood slaughter, and I see myself in a mirror and realize I'm one of the Marines. Those nightmares stopped abruptly the first time I slept with the woman I married 45 years ago. But recently, I've had a few dreams about the war that aren't nightmares. In one, I'm in the battle for Hue. My daughter and her friend Shayna, 8 years old, are with me, and I have to keep them safe, get them somewhere away from the fighting. But there's no panic, no fear, just determination to protect them. In another, I'm with Sergeant Graves, our chief scout. We called him Gravy. And we're hunched over a C-ration stove, making a cup of mocha, a mixture of instant coffee and cocoa, powdered creamer and sugar, and we're going to share it. We're heating the water with C4 plastic explosive, which won't explode if it's not under pressure, but avoid inhaling the fumes. In a third one, Captain Batchelor, Father Lyon, the battalion chaplain, and gunny coach are standing together on top of a hill near the DMZ reading a map, and they call me over and ask me what I think about digging in for the night in this location. I've no idea where they come from or why or what they mean. Ghostly remnants of a long ago life, fragments of memory, real and imagined, all that's left when the war's finally over.
Wow. Bill Ehrhart, Smart Fish Don't Bite, a book that's published by Moonstone Press. If you want to get a copy, go to moonstoneartscenter.org and you can find out about that. Bill, thank you very much. I also wanted to announce that Bill will be reading with Jan Barry at the Philadelphia Library, the main branch in Logan Circle, on November 15th, starting at 5:30. So that's November the 13th at the Free Library. So you can, once again, you can get an opportunity to talk to Bill in person and listen to his work. But I really appreciate it very much. We always have to say, the extraordinary work that Larry Robbins does in advancing the love of poetry in this city. Every week we have a reading at Fergie's and other places, and on a yearly basis it's surely over 100 poets that he's given to Philadelphia and the opportunity. The number of books each year now that he publishes, both chapbooks and anthology, is truly extraordinary. He is indomitable. He's just unstoppable in wanting to advance this and his commitment to poets and poetry. So if you want to find a way to recognize that and support Moonstone, you can do so by going to their website. And so once again, thank you very much to Donald behind the camera there and making this happen, and to PhillyCAM for making this show possible each and every month. So be well, and I'll see you again on December the 2nd.